Hello, I am Surgeon General, and in this video, I will be going over the Beacons of Madness unique boots in Path of Exile, showing two methods to circumvent their downsides in order to gain access to the build-enabling power granted by their upsides. This video is inspired by a recent discharge build, showcased by UberDan and several other content creators. The build uses a weapon swap technique with the Ralakesh's Impatience boots to generate charges, which are then consumed by discharge for huge damage. I've linked to Dan's build in the description if you'd like more details. What interested me was that despite the need to constantly weapon swap for charges, a significant amount of players adopted the build. This begs the question, are there other unique items that have similarly powerful upsides with downsides that might be mitigated the same way? This question led me to the Beacon of Madness boots. This unique comes in three versions, one for each variant of the two-tone boot base. Each version comes with 30% movement speed and some minor stats, but they all grant the Embrace Madness skill. This skill is toggleable, similar to auras, and is used to activate the Glorious Madness status. Each version of the boot grants additional bonuses to your character while affected by Glorious Madness. These bonuses are exceptionally strong with power comparable to Ascendancy passive skills, but are only active while mad. There are downsides associated with Madness, so the intended use of the boots is to activate Madness for a temporary burst of power and then deactivate the Madness status before the downsides become unbearable. However, I will later show two techniques for getting around the downsides of the Madness mechanic. First, though, I will go over the upsides on each of the three variants to demonstrate why you should consider using them. The Armor Evasion hybrid Beacons of Madness are themed around hit-based damage and defenses. The first bonus received under the effects of Glorious Madness is 20% chance to deal double damage. This can be considered a 20% more multiplier for any hit-based build. Additionally, the boots grant 15 additional maximum fortification while mad. Each stack of fortification grants the player an additional 1% less damage taken from hits. The default maximum stack size for fortification is 20, so increasing this to 35 using these boots is equivalent to 19% less damage taken from hits. These are strong bonuses but require a character which is already invested in fortification and is dealing hit-based damage. While powerful, this version of the Beacons of Madness is, in my opinion, the worst of the three, and their bonuses are simply strong, not build-defining. The second version of the boots are themed around poison and chaos damage, and are on the hybrid evasion energy shield base. This version contains the unique mod, all damage inflicts poison while affected by Glorious Madness. By default, only physical and chaos damage can inflict poison, but these boots extend that ability to elemental damage as well. This is an extremely powerful mechanic, opening up the poison archetype to a much wider variety of skills. Some attack builds already exist that leverage this archetype, like Poison Lightning Strike or Molten Strike. However, without these boots, those builds require the use of a rare weapon on the experimented pneumatic dagger base in order to gain access to poison. Alternatively, the builds can use the original sin to convert all damage to chaos in order to enable poison. The downside of this approach is the triple-digit divine cost of the ring. By using the Madness mechanic enabled by the boots, the player can instead choose a weapon with a higher base damage, enabling significantly larger poisons on the enemy. For example, the Rebuke of the Val is a unique one-hander with almost 1100 total DPS at maximum roll. While this is the highest base damage one-handed unique weapon in the game, it is balanced by having its damage spread out among all the damage types. This makes it very difficult to use in normal builds because there are few mechanics which would scale all of these damage types simultaneously. However, if the player can poison with all damage types, they can get the large base damage to their poison with the Rebuke of the Vow while focusing on scaling only chaos damage over time, leading to very efficient generation of damage. Note that a pneumatic dagger with comparable DPS would likely be mirror tier. The poison mechanic from the boots also applies to spell damage. This opens up a new class of builds using spells which generate a large amount of hits, such as Eye of Winter, that would be very synergistic with poison but that otherwise have a difficult time converting to chaos. Additionally, since poison damage scales based on the damage type of the hit that created the poison as well as chaos damage, There is an additional vector for scaling. In the Eye of Winter example, Hatred's more cold damage multiplier would also apply to any poison created by the skill. Note that the mod reads all damage inflicts poison, not can inflict poison. This means that while affected by Glorious Madness, you effectively have 100% chance to poison. This means that the player can scale poison damage without needing to bother with reaching the poison chance cap. You can therefore avoid spending mana reservation on Herald of Agony, pathing to passives like Toxic Strikes, or stacking cluster jewels to get access to multiple instances of septic spells. As if these bonuses weren't enough, the boots also grant 40% chance for enemies to explode for chaos damage when killed. This provides excellent quality of life for pack clearing. Compare this mod to the 10% found on the cluster jewel notable Unspeakable Gifts. If you've ever played a chaos build with clusters before, you know how expensive these jewels can be. These 1 chaos boots grant a mod 4 times as powerful. In fact, just that mod alone is almost as strong as the Occultist Ascendancy node Profane Bloom, which grants a 50% chance to explode for the same amount of damage. I believe this version of the boots to be build defining, allowing whole new archetypes and playstyles that are otherwise inaccessible or only possible at very high costs. The third version of the boots is themed around elemental ailments and is equally powerful to the previous, if not more. This version grants igniting, chilling, and shocking confluxes while affected by Glorious Madness. While you have the confluxes, all of your damage will inflict each of the 3 standard elemental ailments, again, without the need to invest in scaling the chance to inflict the ailment. Sources of the confluxes in the game are extremely rare. You can get confluxes for the alternate ailments, Brittle, Sap, and Scorch, with a unique amulet, but the standard ailment confluxes are only available on Hunter-influenced helmets. With the Hunter helmet version, the conflux is only active for 3 seconds every 8 seconds, leading to an uptime of only 37%. Moreover, the mods are mutually exclusive with one another, so there is no way in the game to get all 3 of the confluxes simultaneously. Having access to the confluxes allows you to play certain skill archetypes that are typically only available via the Elementalist Ascendancy, such as non-fire-based Ignite builds like Frostblink. The boots should likely be considered to be even stronger, as you would have the opportunity to spend Ascendancy points on other scaling mechanics instead of just enabling the build type. In addition to enabling many skills to be played as Ignite, the confluxes are also useful in regular hit-based builds. The boots enable essentially free shock, which can be an extremely strong way to scale damage at little investment. The chills from the boots are a nice defensive layer, reducing enemies' action speed, but can also be leveraged for offensive purposes, such as through the use of hypothermia support. Finally, the boots also provide complete immunity to all elemental ailments. Ailment immunity is considered by many to be a requirement in the endgame. Players will typically invest a jewel socket and several mod slots on gear to cap ailment avoidance using Storm Shroud or spend 50% mana reservation on Purity of Elements. This version of the boots providing immunity is a nice bonus because the boot slot is typically a large source of avoidance that would be missed when using a unique. I hope I've given you a good idea of the power that the Glorious Madness status enables. This power comes with a pretty substantial downside. The next couple sections will cover the touched debuffs that it applies, as well as how to mitigate their effects. The Beacon of Madness boots grant the skill Embrace Madness on your skill bar. This instant use, no-cost skill is used to toggle the Glorious Madness state. While you can toggle the status off at any point, there is a 9-second cooldown when you come out of Glorious Madness to prevent you from going rapidly back and forth between the states. You can use Embrace Madness to activate the bonuses from the boots, but when you do, you are inflicted with a random touched debuff every second. There are 4 different touched debuffs. Wasting Touch grants 9% reduced recovery rate of life and energy shield. Diluting Touch reduces the amount of flask charges you gain and reduces your flask effect by 9% each. Eroding Touch increases your damage taken by 6%, similar to a 6% shock. And finally, Paralyzing Touch reduces your action speed by 6%. Each of these debuffs has a maximum stack limit of 10 with a 20-second duration. The duration of the entire stack is refreshed anytime a new stack is added, even if it is at its limit. The intended use of the unique is to activate Glorious Madness to receive a temporary burst of power from the mods on the boots. Then, when the touched stacks reach a point where their effects are no longer tolerable, you deactivate the Madness state, cleansing all of the stacks. The huge upsides of the Madness state are balanced by the long downtime that you have to wait before being able to reactivate the boots. You are encouraged to balance the risks and rewards of the boots by actively managing your number of debuff stacks. However, I will now show two techniques that can be used to maintain very high uptime on the Glorious Madness buffs while keeping the touched debuffs as low as possible. The first method revolves around the idea that the touched debuffs are treated like all other debuffs in the game and can therefore be modified by sources of debuffs expire faster. This effect reduces the duration of the touch statuses and can be stacked additively. Debuff expiration can be found from a variety of sources, including the Aracali Pantheon, in modest quantities on uniques such as Torrent's Reclamation, and in large quantities on the Warp Timepiece and Stasis Prison. The window of opportunity wheel on the passive tree also grants 15%, as well as access to the Duration Mastery for another 15%. Taking as many sources of this stat as possible, it is reasonable to achieve over 300% faster debuff expiration with significant investment. The goal is to make the touch debuffs expire fast enough that you will not roll the same version enough consecutive times before the debuff is reapplied, and therefore its duration is reset. We can calculate the duration of the touch debuffs by adding up all sources of expire faster and expire slower. In this case, we'll be avoiding expire slower as much as possible. After calculating the final expiration rate, you simply divide the base duration by the expiration rate. Using this process, we can calculate how the debuff duration changes as we stack sources of faster expiration. This chart shows the debuff duration, which starts at 20 seconds and falls down towards 5 seconds as we reach upwards of 300% faster expiration. Remember that reaching 300% reduction requires a significant investment on both gear and passive points. Also note that there are diminishing returns in the effectiveness of faster expiration. Each additional point you get grants less duration reduction than the previous. Recall that the touch debuffs are applied randomly and that they are cleansed when their duration expires. In order to find the chance to cleanse a debuff stack, we calculate the chance to consecutively roll enough touches of different types for the duration to expire, which is given by this equation. The chance to apply a certain touch is 25%. Our application rate is hard-coded at 1 per second by the Madness skill, and the duration of the buffs depends on our expiration rate as shown in the previous chart. This graph shows the chance to cleanse a given stack as a function of the amount of faster expiration on the character. While these chances are relatively low, this occurs each second when a new debuff ticks, so the effect is larger than it would first seem. Finally, using these chances, we can calculate the expected number of stacks of each debuff that the character would have at a steady state with a given debuff expiration rate. Since stacks are capped at 10, it takes a pretty significant investment into debuff expiration before you get any benefit from it at all. However, with enough investment, you can more than half the average amount of stacks that a character would carry. Translating these stacks back into character effects, a player with 300% increased expiration rate would, on average, have to tolerate these downsides in order to have 100% uptime on the Beacon of Madness upsides with very little micromanagement. Additionally, there are methods to specifically offset these effects. For example, the minimum action speed from the Juggernaut or Trickster ascendancies can be used to negate the effect of Paralyzing Touch, and passive skills and equipment mods can be used to offset the reduced flask and recovery effects from the wasting and diluting touches. While this is a reasonable approach to enable the powerful effects of the Beacons of Madness, it requires significant investment on the character, which comes with a high opportunity cost. I will now instead show an alternative method that requires very little character investment, but just requires that the player periodically inputs several button presses, similar to a divine blessing. We can take advantage of a perhaps unintended interaction on the boots, wherein if the player no longer satisfies the stat requirements needed to equip the item, the madness state and all debuffs are removed, but most importantly, there is no cooldown placed on re-entering Glorious Madness. To take advantage of this, we will use a weapon swap technique. First, we equip the Beacons of Madness and socket a gem with a high stat requirement, such as an aura, in them. We will set up our stats in such a way that the stat requirements for the boots are satisfied by a mod on our main or offhand item. In this example, my character does not have the 93 dexterity requirement for the boots unless I am wielding the wand shown, which has a crafted dexterity mod on it. While wielding the wand, I can activate the Embrace Madness skill and take advantage of the Glorious Madness buffs. This will stack up touch debuffs, but when I want to cleanse the debuffs, instead of turning off the Embrace Madness skill, which would incur a 9-second cooldown, I will instead press the weapon swap hotkey to swap out to a different item set, which does not have the stat requirements for Beacons of Madness yet. This disables all effects of the Beacons of Madness and removes the Glorious Madness state, but importantly, takes the Embrace Madness skill off of our skill bar. Because we no longer have access to the skill, its cooldown is not tracked. This means that it does not incur the 9-second cooldown penalty for coming out of Embrace Madness. We can then immediately swap back to the previous weapon set, which re-enables the Beacons of Madness, and instantly turn Glorious Madness back on. This weapon swap tech allows you to toggle the Glorious Madness buffs on and off at will, with the speed only being limited by how fast you can press the weapon swap, and then re-enable Glorious Madness. This is 3 keystrokes. You will be able to maintain very high uptime on the Glorious Madness upsides and have the ability to cleanse the debuffs at will. If you do this every 6 to 10 seconds, as if you were activating a Divine Blessing, your debuff stacks will never get over 2 or 3. While this method doesn't offer the best quality of life, it is certainly the easiest way to enable the build-defining power of the mods on Beacons of Madness. This technique won't be to every player's taste, but I believe it could be especially powerful for boss-killing characters who plan their builds around very short encounters already. So, to summarize, I hope I have conveyed how powerful the Glorious Madness upsides on the Beacons of Madness are. 2 of the 3 variants in particular have build-enabling mechanics that could open the door to playing skills in entirely different ways. The boots offer power equivalent to some Ascendancy notables and other uniques that are priced in the triple-digit range in softcore trade. I hope that you will consider the interactions that the boots enable to come up with some interesting new archetypes or to take existing archetypes such as Frostblink Ignite onto different Ascendancies. I think that these uniques are criminally underused for how powerful they could be. I would have wrote this off to the clunkiness of using a weapon swap technique, but based on the number of players playing around the weapon swap with Ralakesh discharge builds, it seems that more people are tolerant of this type of gameplay than I originally thought. In this video, I showed how the intended use of the boots is for a temporary burst of power, but that this can be extended to high uptime through the use of 2 methods. The first being stacking sources of debuffs expire faster, which allows you to reach 100% uptime on the boot's effects while maintaining an average of 3 to 5 stacks of debuffs. The second technique takes advantage of weapon swapping with carefully set up attributes and attribute requirements. Doing a double weapon swap to cleanse debuffs and then re-enabling the madness state enables very high uptime on the boot mods while keeping the number of debuff stacks quite low. As always, it's my hope that this video has given you some ideas of interesting builds or tech that you can use yourself in-game. If you have a clever idea for how this tech can be used or a build concept that would be enabled by these boots, let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video or are interested in more content of this type or in-depth build guides with an emphasis on mechanics, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.